aswea, après-midi, nous gagnons pour nous parler sur qui nous parler sur Haïti avec le public là, qui nous capable enseigner en Haïti. Nous comptons en pile et gagner un panel qui est excellent qui peut brasser l'idée sur qui nous capable mettre lumière pour une image qui bien, parole qui appropriée une fois pour toutes en Haïti. So in English, I just wanted to thank you all for coming. Moments of crisis like these make us all wonder why we're here. It's also reminding us how important it is that what we do is that we need to continue doing what we do because the image of Haiti is often very, 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 very problematic. History of a legacy of racist understandings of Haiti that began from the Haitian Revolution. So when we hear narratives about poor Haiti or the continuation of disaster upon disaster, it's important for us as humanists, as social scientists, as natural scientists, as linguists, as scholars, as artists to think and to talk back to these narratives. What Gina Lee said that Haiti needs new narratives, and we're excited today that we're continuing this important work by having a discussion about a very important book about how to teach Haiti. So we're very happy to have a very dynamic panel. We have Cécile Asselien as co-editor, and I am going to take this to Cécile, if you can say a few words.
Okay. Thank you. Bonsoir tout le monde. Merci en pile. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. A special thanks to Julio, who's doing his behind the scene magic, and to Darlene and all the other emerging scholars, colleagues, Mario, Petrushka, Ayana, Irene, etc. So I just want to briefly talk about how this book came about. Teaching Haiti Strategies for Creating New Narratives started as a type of frustration. It started with me as a Haitian scholar and a literary and cultural studies scholar. My frustration not being able to find enough resources so that I can teach Haiti in a more complex way and not just through literature. And oftentimes when you cannot find something, you create it. So when complaining to different colleagues, such as Jessica Adams and Francois, among others, they say, well, why don't you get scholars together and create such a book? So I reached out to Valérie Loiseau, who's a scholar of Francophone studies and who's also interested in Haiti and has worked on Haiti. And as they say, the rest is history. I would like to thank the various contributors. Some of them are here. I see their names. I especially want to thank Vladimir Sibyl Charlier, who has been generous in letting me use her work when in the book. I also want to thank Valerie Orlando, who is not here because she was traveling, so she's unable to be here. I want to thank John Ribot, Alessandra Benedicti Coquin, who's going to be talking later. And I will be remiss if I did not say Jessica is really, in the Haitian tradition, the marraine, the godmother of this book, because without her amazing editorial support to really put the book together last summer, while I was moving and Valerie was in France working, it will have been almost impossible. So I'll just read the name of the scholars just as a sign of appreciation and as a sign of respect for them. I'll just go in the order that their essays appear in the book. Régine Jean-Charles, Bonnie Thomas, Joubert Satir, Don Walicek, Darren Staloff, and Alessandra Benedictine Copeland, who will be talking, Sophie Watt, Agnes Payson-Zeiss, Elizabeth Langley, Jessica Adams, John Rebo, Anne François, and others, Sibylle Vladimir Charlier, Ulrich Jean-Pierre, and Colette Brasilia. And thank you, each and every one of you, for being here.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Thank you for joining us for the first in a series that we are calling Translating Haiti. And we're thinking about the ways in which we are tasked to translate Haiti to various audiences. Today, we're speaking about translation, both inside and outside of the classroom, and really thinking through the, not only as an intellectual task, right, or what we are called to do, but the emotional weight of just translation. We're going to start a conversation really thinking about the role of us as scholars, our role to the public, particularly now. And I want to acknowledge the other emerging scholars here with us. You'll see them. You have Irene, Cecile, who's guiding us, and Petrushka, myself, Mario, and we are thinking about the ways that emerging scholars as part of HSA can begin to lead conversations that are important to us. So we have 2 more events in these series thinking about the work of translation, and we're happy that you're here with us today with the heavy weight of this task and what that means for each of us in our daily lives as we kind of move through this world in this particular moment of overlapping crises. So thank you, everyone. I'm gonna now invite our panelists to introduce themselves real quickly, and then we'll go to launch into the conversation. Mark, I know you've already spoken in terms of welcoming folks, but it would be great if you can speak, then Jessica, and we can popcorn from there.
Sure, thank you, Darlene. Mark Schuler, anthropologist working in Haiti since 2001. I have been working on NGOs, non-government organizations in aid and disasters. Current research is in the Grand South of Haiti. Have been affiliated with the State University of Haiti and currently president of HSA. Looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Cecile, I know you introduced yourself a little bit as you were talking about the book, but we'd love to hear more about your positionality.
Thank you, Darlene. I'm Cécile Axilien. I am based in Kennesaw, Georgia, outside of Atlanta, and I am chair of the Interdisciplinary Studies Department at Kennesaw State, and I'm a cultural, literary, and film studies scholar. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica, are you able to hear us?
Yes, I can hear you guys well. I'm hoping that everybody can also hear me despite my unconventional location. Maybe not so unconventional with everything that's been happening during the pandemic. So my name is Jessica Adams, and I'm an associate professor of English at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras. And I'm also finishing a JD at the UPR Escuela de Derecho. And thanks to my daughter, I've also rescued many animals in need, including a horse from the local racetrack, which is why I'm sitting here in my car at the stables while she does her job to support her horse. So I published a lot of work on the Caribbean and on the South, and I've worked a lot with Cecile. It's been a great blessing in my life to know Cecile from our graduate school days, and I'm very honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Patrick Bellegarde-Smith might be joining us later, but I think Alexandra, are you here with us?
Yes.
Hi,
Darlene.
Oh, hi. I see.
Hi. My name is Alessandra, and Cecile and Jessica asked me to speak about my positionality, so I won't go into it too much. What I will say now is that I now work for a museum, actually 4 museums, the ethnographic museums in the Netherlands, which are filled with things that are finally being named as stolen. And I work under the aegis of Wayne Modest, and I can talk more about that later.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everyone. We are going to do something a bit different, right? We're going to attempt to have a conversational panel. And towards the end, we're going to invite everyone in this room. So this is not a webinar, right? This is supposed to be interactive, and hopefully we can get a lively conversation going with everyone here. And I'll have the rest of the emerging scholars. I think Petrushka is going to help co-moderate with me. Petrushka, I don't see you, but feel free to unmute yourself and introduce your positionality, and then we'll get started.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. I am Petrushka Moise. I am based out at Grinnell College in Grinnell, Iowa. I am a Mellon Fellow for the Visual Arts, and my focus is Haitian visual arts and digital archiving. And I will have the pleasure of, with Darlene, to moderate what I anticipate to being a very wonderful conversation. So I'd like to begin with welcoming Jessica and Alessandra to our forum to have a wonderful discussion. I've had the pleasure of reading your works. And I'm not going to spoil it for anyone, because I would definitely think that everyone should. I'm definitely going to do what Cecile didn't want to do. I'm going to pitch this book. So that everybody needs to go and reach out to your libraries and, of course, get the book to begin our academic year. But we have a wonderful conversation ahead of us. Ladies, I would like for you to begin by talking briefly about your essays, your contributions in the book, Teaching Haiti. But before you begin with what you actually wrote, can you please talk to what drove you to write to this book? When Cecile asked for your assistance, can you talk about the charge? Because sometimes we sometimes forget that a blessing and a charge are synonymous. So can you talk to us? And I will begin with Jessica. How did you feel about the opportunity to write in this subject?
Thank you for that question, Petrushka. I mean, I was really humbled by the request from Cecile, because I always feel like I don't, you know, even though we've worked together on Haiti for years, I feel like I don't know enough to just to say anything. I mean, to be just perfectly frank with you, I'm always like feeling like I don't have enough information. So I tried to turn that into an advantage, I guess. And I had been living in the Caribbean I've lived in the Caribbean now for over 10 years. And as I was, after doing a lot of academic work on Haiti, I was living on a boat in the Caribbean, traveling between islands. I taught at a couple of Caribbean universities. And through these various experiences, both academic and non-academic, I continued to witness these stereotypes and prejudices that I felt like called on me to respond in direct and immediate ways. And so I was kind of one foot in academia and one foot outside it, and feeling like the academic work that I had been doing, speaking of translation, that I needed to kind of, we're kind of talking about in this panel in general, to translate that into what people like to call the real world. When in my conversations with people, in my interactions with people, I needed to be able to be able to make a difference as much as possible, right? So that's kind of where I was coming from in terms of taking on this charge.
Thank you. Alessandra, how about you? What did you feel when you got the call?
So I applied to through the CFP, and I barely knew Cecile at the time, but since every summer I think of it, because it's every summer since 2017 that in some form I've worked on it intensely. And last summer, thanks to you, Jessica, and I wasn't preparing this question, but it's here. I remember Cecile saying, okay, if you're going to do something on John Adams, you need to do it with a historian. And I had already applied to do it with a historian, but then the historian who ended up writing it with me wasn't sure if he wanted to do it. So I remember being really insecure because I really felt this article had to come out. And I think that's what it is. And when I talk more about my positionality is, the blessing is that I innocently had the hubris to begin studying Haiti. And through 20 years, I realized that the blessing wasn't that. The blessing was a charge, and it's always a charge. And 2017 to 2021 now has been my realizing that I don't really belong so much in Haitian studies, but those 25 years of doing Haitian studies means I'm called upon at certain important moments to do things that I think are essential. And for me, the way it comes to me is in terms of teaching Haiti, is there's so much that I know. And one of the examples is Trujillo's Silencing the Past. I know that's a fact and I believe it. But convincing students of that, convincing other professors and teachers and colleagues of that means I have to be so on top of my game. And I realized US history was part of that. And I wasn't a historian. So for me, it seemed really important to come up with an article that gave people really hands-on things to be able to say, look, Haiti's everywhere. It's in Spielberg's films. And this is how we're going to explain it in 10 pages.
Thank you so much. And now I'll turn it over to Darlene, and she will continue with the questions.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I'm gonna so speaking about teaching Haiti, I am curious, and I'm gonna direct this question. Cecile, I know you're not expecting this question, but I really want to turn it to you. I love how you said, Alexandra, that Haiti is everywhere and it's really orienting people to see this. But what is it like trying to teach Haiti different from how people understand it, right? So this question then is to Cecile, and I'd love if Cecile and then Mark can kind of speak about what does it mean to, it's not just translating Haiti to students, but almost like deconstructing a long-standing narrative that is part of the popular imagination about this place and what it means. So I'll turn it to you, Cecile, and then Mark.
Thank you, Darlene. I think for me, teaching Haiti is really about, I love Bell Hooks. I'm a big Bell Hooks fan. And her Teaching to Transgress has become one of my go-to book. So I think is realizing that we can do a lot in the classroom and not be afraid. And I know that may change depending on where we are in our careers. I know tenure is real, but I think being very conscious about reading, assigning Haitian scholars in Haiti and outside of Haiti. I think that's so important. I also think it's crucial to teach Haiti in relation with and to other countries. We're talking about the US, France, and Latin America and the Caribbean. As Martinican scholar Edouard Glissant reminds us in his theory of tout monde, you know, everybody, everyone, however we want to translate it, he talks about that as a space where people and things are constantly moving. So we have to teach Haiti in that manner. And that means we cannot teach Haiti without it being in relationship to others. We also have to refrain from focusing mainly or primarily on disaster narratives. And for me, it's very important to centralize language, to centralize Haitian Creole, one of Haiti's official languages, when talking about Haiti. And lastly, for me, I think it's the importance of teaching and collaboration. And by that, it has to be radical collaboration. And by radical, I mean not just the typical, oh, I'm collaborating with somebody else who's teaching the same thing I'm teaching, but collaborating with scholars inside, Haitian scholars inside Haiti, with artists, with activists. I think I am a better teacher and scholar because of my work with artists, because of my connection with these artists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Really important question, and Cecile, wonderful response. I think it's I had the experience of working with a very fantastic women's organization, and as part of my commitment to decolonize anthropology, during my dissertation research, I was asking what kind of solidarity gesture would you like? And they said, we want you to make a movie. And so that became Potomita, Haitian Women Pillars of the Global Economy, which was co-produced, co-directed with Renee Bergen. And this film came out in 2009, officially published. And I was invited to have a Q&A period after the screenings. Then the earthquake of 2010 struck. And so the women in the film were very much top of my mind, like what's going on. And the conversation, because this film was just produced, it was just out there, it became a vehicle for fundraisers for small groups. So I was put in the role of teaching Haiti outside of the classroom pretty early on. It's really instructive people's questions that they ask about Haiti. I made it a point to like actually ask people, just write down the first word that comes to your mind when you hear the word Haiti. And so it was about 1,200 people until I stopped. Of those 1,200 people, how many people do you think, right? And then I asked them, raise your hand if that is a positive, a good thing or not. You know, is it a good thing? You know, that first thing that you wrote down about Haiti, is it positive? Out of 1,200 people, how many people do you think raised their hand? One person raised their hand. That's why I stopped doing it. I couldn't do it anymore. It was Wyclef. This guy was he was into hip hop, and he heard of Wyclef, and Wyclef had the Haitian flag around him. So it really hit home that we have our work to do. I mean, and then Gina's clarion call hit it home for all of us that we need, that representations matter, that the history of white supremacy and the way that it was punishing Haiti for its audacity to believe that that humanity, that African peoples are also entitled to liberty, equality, and fraternity. And the conversation about how, what are some of the challenges I face is honestly, we're working against 200 plus years of systematic white supremacist lies about Haiti, or characterizations, demonization, dehumanization, and that bleeds into the media. And just like this last set of disasters, like you only hear about it if it's bad news. I mean, the Olympics could have been an opportunity for Haiti to have a little bit more of a respect, because who was lighting the flame was, Haitian as well. But she was lighting the flame for Japan. So there could have been some opportunity for Haiti is more than the headlines. It's more than disasters. The deep-seated do-gooderism or white saviorism that people have when they do interact with Haiti is a challenge that it's hard it's hard to address. I mean, when I also teach for Haiti when I look like a missionary, and I white. When I'm in the Port-au-Prince airport, people glom onto me like blue, and so they just sort of, how do you get out of this airport? They're super freaked out, and then when they come back from they're on the way back from Port-au-Prince to wherever they're going, they're like, they have their shoes off, they're like laying on the floor, playing their guitar, just having a good old time. Some of them in cornrows, just like hanging because they did their job as white saviors. And so the challenge to engage people is you have to get through their understandings of what is Haiti represent to the world, what does Haiti represent to the United States. I grew up in Chicago, I live in Chicago. I had to be a graduate student to know that the founder of Chicago was Haitian, not just Haitian. He was an emissary for a free respect for a free Haiti. And the Haitian Revolution paved the way for U.S. manifest destiny through the Louisiana Purchase. We're finally, belatedly, in 2021, having a naming ceremony for the Tusabo Hall on my campus at Northern Illinois University. And they did not initially invite a Haitian person to do so. So this is something that we have to really, really, really challenge. So outside the classroom, I mean, me as a white person, I have people sort of like assume that I'm like going to have a patient and sympathetic ear, but I also have to watch how it is that I use the word we, and be careful of my audience. When I'm speaking, I'm always having like, who is listening and what is in their heads already. So choosing those words extremely carefully. In my moment of frustration, I never say for Haiti, because if I do ever in public say for Haiti, that reinforces that narrative that Haiti is somehow, less than. So it's constant vigilance, and it's understanding that these frames have material consequences. I mean, what I call as Cecile mentioned, that we should have more than disaster narratives, but we'll look at that disaster narrative itself. Who is framed within as the actor, and who is framed outside as victim? It justifies and reinforces foreign intervention. So the challenge is like how to address that international reality that there are some people that are that have visas that can leave Haiti whenever they want, and some people that are sent home. Even last week there were TPS seekers that were deported from Haiti. So to Haiti, sorry. So challenges are our narrative construction, the worldview, to use an anthropological term, that what makes sense beyond the headlines, and the international structures that reinforce foreign domination of Haiti. And it's a struggle every time, but we have to do that every time.
Thank you, Mark. I have the next question to ask, but I want to ask this in a kind of macro to micro process. And Mark touched base with this, so he could pass if he feels he's already answered this. But I would like for Mark to pass it over to Cecile, and for Cecile to speak as the person who created this body of work, and then to Alessandra and to Jessica in the sense of the people who contributed to this work. So the question is, as public intellectuals who see yourselves committed to the sense of l'écrivain engagé, to representing Haiti in a more complex and truthful manner, could you comment on the importance of translating Haiti to a non-academic audience? In other words, why do you feel your work is important to be shared with non-traditional, non-academic circles such as NPR, Al Jazeera, Global Perspectives, to name but a few venues where you are presenting? And I think that what sometimes people forget is how macro to micro our audiences are. So you spoke about that, Mark, about the audience that we have to address. So could you, in a sense, popcorn your response to Cecile and Cecile onto our guest? Thank you.
I'm going to interrupt quickly and to say that Patrick has joined us, so perhaps we can include him in this conversation as well. Patrick, I've lost you in the crowd. Do you know how to do the raise your hand feature? I found you. So maybe we can popcorn it to Patrick and then to the other speakers as well. Thank you.
Okay.
I thought I was being slick by figuring out the time. I thought I was correct in assuming Central Time, but apparently it started a long time ago. And I also was prepared to speak in Creole, but it seems to me that it's an English audience.
Creole.
Okay.
It's all part of changing the narratives.
Tout le monde parle créole, bon, ici là, mais c'est 2-3 monde qui parlent créole. Est-ce que nous avons haïtien, en pile haïtien, sur Zoom ça? Non, non, c'est
You can
Patrick.
speak in whatever language is comfortable, and I'll put notes in the chat. I think, again, it's all part of the changing the narratives.
Eh bien, je quitte le pays à l'homme petit monde. Alors, français assuré, créole pas fini. Mais un petit monde net. Mais l'homme rivé Saint-Thomas aux îles Vierges, moins que moun qui est l'autre bord, pas connaît rien d'Haïti. Et l'homme rivé aux États-Unis, quand il m'apprend anglais, c'est de même bas là, puis fort. Alors, il te demandé, voilà, quand il va arriver qu'on y a. Alors, on fait présentation dans toute télévision, quand l'homme des jeunes, collège. Et puis, pour 40 ans, on fait la navette entre radio, télévision, conférences, discours, tout partout dans les États-Unis, et aussi la communauté haïtienne dans tout. Parce que moi, que en pile monde qui était retrouvé ici, en pile haïtien américain, pas de connaître histoire pays. Alors, but anyway, I guess to be a bit more comfortable, because my entire university career was done in English. And I see I froze again, I don't know why. And non, moi que, enfin, gon by, comme t'avais dit, so that culture is simultaneously the fruit of a people's history and a determinant of that history. Et l'homme rivé boy c'est là, moun yo appris Haïti, rien dans yo tout le temps. They gave me the derisive name Monsieur Haïti, et c'est Rio Taprim. Dans tout côté me passé aux États-Unis. Alors, ça va fin de ranger me trop, non? Mais me fait ça pour faire. Mais récemment, m'bay jeune yo la parole. Quand y a l'on yo relem, télévision relem ba comme ça, me dit eh bien contactez un tel. C'est parce que m'bay gen courage encore. Grand monde, fin grand monde. Soldat mourir, c'est soldat à vivre, il apprend la relève. Alors c'est comme ça moi. Mais moi ça me tendait à toujours parce que moi c'est même expérience que me fait bon ici là parce que les autres et puis alors on pas qu'on sacrifier dans ça dans Zoom, pas confortable dans Zoom. On trop grand monde pour ça.
Non, mais nous t'entendons bien.
Vous entendez bien?
Oui.
Okay. Out of curiosity, do we have a lot of folks online that are directly in Haiti? Or is it pretty much an American audience in the US here?
I think it's an American audience primarily.
Oh, okay.
We have a handful of people calling in from Haiti as well.
Oh, okay, good. But I've liked what I have heard so much as already, but I wish I was here earlier based on that time décalage. and I would have been able to make more sense of what was being said. But continue. There was a question on the here, and I would like to hear others respond to it.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Do we want the question rephrased again, everyone, or the next person, I think, who would like to speak to the importance, right, of translating Haiti to non-academic audiences and even journalist outlets? If anybody else would like to kind of add on to that. Thank you.
Mark, do you want to start?
So the work that I do requires public engagement. I work with activist groups. I work with local organizations, and frankly, as an anthropologist who talks to living people, people that have a situation that is temporarily in chaos or in crisis, it's my obligation, even if I spend 10 minutes with someone, to try to do something with it. Even if I don't explicitly promise, people are asking, people are expecting that their lives will be improved with from the engagement with me. So that obligates me to do a certain set of communication. So it's not just about blogging, although that's important, because blogging, you can have all kinds of hyperlinks. As a scholar, it's easy to hide, to connect yourself with other works. There are the other media that having conversations, they're super important. But in meetings, in coalitions, where people that are comfortable speaking on behalf of Haiti or talking about Haiti need to be holding each other accountable. And if the subject of your research is, I'm hearing this, and I'm hearing that people are concerned about the way this is framed in the media or framed in Washington, then intervene. So petitions are signed. There is, for example, a tendency to portray Haiti as beyond the pale. I don't want to repeat the stereotype about how it is in relationship with the rest of the hemisphere, but whenever that's said, it reinforces that there is no government. Just call Haiti a failed state is to turn it into a failed state. So the intervention has to happen every time that conversation is happening. So intervening in Washington, intervening in NGO spaces, intervening in UN logistics spaces is an absolute necessity. Each has their own formula, each has their own risks associated, each has their own language. And so cracking the code is important to any kind of successful scholarship. So there's not a one size fits all, there's not a formula. I will say that of all my experiences, I had a group of students, Haitian American students at York College, present their work, and busy Washington staffers were, put away their smartphones to pay attention, because they were talking about what their experience was like working in the camps, in the internally displaced persons camps. So to me, it was the human connection, not just the scholarly, detached, quote unquote scientific or statistics that get people to pay attention, but actually documenting real human connection and real human experience, I think can be really transformative, especially since they were all Haitian American students, and they talked about and they wrote about what it was like to be in the camps and to be thought of as a Blanc, because they weren't raised in, because they weren't in Haiti because they had a U.S. passport, or being somehow disconnected, and the sense of interrogation that they had to go through as people with some privilege. So yeah, I'm just gonna say that there's no one right way to do things, and you do have to, while it is important that we need to be honest and own our mistakes and make those mistakes, because we're not trained in the academy, or at least I wasn't trained in the academy, how to write a blog, much less write a briefing paper, much less write a tweet, much less engage in a public meeting where other people who are working on the same team reinforce white saviorist language. So while it's important that we learn from our mistakes, we need to be accountable to the results as well. So I'm going to point it back to Cecile as I was requested. So thank
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I think more and more for me, I try to put my voice elsewhere so other colleagues and the Truth Out, as well as the Latin American, Latin American advisor, because I do think there's a space. And what's challenging for me is I want to be mindful of my words. I'm trained in language and culture and literature. So at times, the media wants you to give them, to solve Haiti's problem for the 5 minutes that they are interested. And I always have to be careful. So I have refused at times because I didn't feel like I was ready. I remember, I think it was MSNBC who contacted me immediately the morning the former president was assassinated. And then I didn't respond because I felt like that venue, and I don't want people to say what I'm not saying. Plus, I also live in Georgia. I'm also at a public university where you have to go to all type of channel to say what you want to say. So now when I speak to the media, I tell them, this is Cécile Axilien. I am a scholar of Haitian studies, but I don't put my university affiliation. I think in the world of attack on critical race theory, we have to be mindful of that, of that very reality. And as people of color, women, people with accents. So sometimes talking to the media based on our positionalities and where we are, our very life may be in danger. So that's also a reality that some of us don't think about. But to continue the conversation, I'm going to send it to my colleague and comrade Jessica Adams, because I know in many instances, she has beautifully teach about Haiti outside of the quote unquote classic ivory tower. And I will want to hear her thoughts.
Thank you, Cecile. I was just gonna say that I wanted to add a little something to what you were saying, just based on all of our conversations about these issues, and thinking about why is it important to represent Haiti in a more complex and truthful manner, kind of generally outside of the academy. I mean, I'm in the Caribbean right now, and as you guys may be able to tell a little bit from the background there, the fact is, I think that people in terms of the dominant narrative tend to dismiss Haiti as and the Caribbean in general, in fact, as sort of a place that is obviously, the notion is that it's very messed up. I mean, here in Puerto Rico, it's similar. Failures. The narrative is about failures, and the fact is, why is it important to center Haiti in truthful ways? Because Haiti is central to world history. Haiti is central to the histories of colonialism and imperialism and slavery. To dismiss it is to say that those things have somehow stopped, right? And we see this with all the kind of notion of, they're filming a movie in this place where I am, so there's like a truck going by. To dismiss it, to say, oh, poor Haiti, etc., is to say those things aren't happening anymore. And with critical race theory and all the sort of noise around that, which is obviously like complete misunderstandings and kind of this right-wing hysteria, is they're trying to once again like marginalize the reality of, for example, where did the United States come from? And you guys have also touched on that, thinking about, Mark was mentioning the history of Chicago, et cetera. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's critical to speak to those things. And I lived in the Dominican Republic for about 3 years, and I found, right, you're on the other side of Hispaniola, and the prejudice against Haitians, I was living in a town that was near the border, is very strong. And so I would say to people that basically in my, at the time, pretty bad Spanish, this is not right, and you person who is telling me that, that Haitians are somehow these sort of almost not even human people, your neighbors, basically all of our neighbors, is basically like reinscribing this colonial narrative that also implicates people in the Dominican Republic. And so obviously my positionality, one of the challenges that I have, it's a challenge, and it's like, I guess I can turn it to my advantage too, is that I'm like a white person, right? I'm like, totally gringa. And so it's like to feel like I hear people saying those prejudice things. And so I'm like super in the place of needing to be able to respond to those forcefully. And I'm also, when I want to speak in an authoritative way, I have to be careful because I'm not an authority, right? In the way that, for example, Cecile is. So it's a delicate balance, and yet, from this, in this macro level, like we must do the work because Haiti is so fundamental to the history of the West in every way, and to dismiss it is to say colonialism, imperialism, slavery. Those are just all just history, meaning doesn't matter anymore.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you so much for that. Merci en pile. M'a posé question. I'll actually ask Patrick. This is and to anybody else, and this is more recent, right? On the type of work that we continue to do. This question is about recent responses in public scholarship to current issues in Haiti. I'll read the question, and it's asking if you could you give some recent examples of how you've served in your role as a public intellectual? I'm not sure if you how one thinks about this role as a public intellectual or speaking truth to power in the past few weeks, months, particularly around the assassination, the earthquake. What is that an op-ed one has written or an interview one has given? Do you think you reach a much larger audience when you present in these non-academic venues? And what are the benefits and the drawbacks of presenting in these venues?
Well, I receive about 50 emails every single day, and this has increased over the last month or so, asking me to do this, that, and the other. And I have responded to some of these. Some of these are bogus as far as I'm concerned, because people are not truly interested in the answer. And because I've been doing it for 40, 45 years now, and I typically suggest the name of younger scholars that need to take la relève. I remember, for instance, an event that occurred in October 1983 after the US had invaded Grenada. And I was asked to go live on television to explain the situation. And I had to say, first of all, that Grenada was not Grenada in Spain, because people did not know. And after I did my piece live on television, the young reporter walked up to me and she said, "You didn't say what I wanted you to say. We will never interview you again." And this has occurred on a number of occasions because I was not careful, I suppose, with my wording. And I appreciate what Mark Schuller has said in terms of tailoring the answers to every possible audience. What I have found most successful is to address Haitian community organizations in Miami and Boston and New York City and Montreal and other places where I was asked to speak, and realizing that they needed support, they needed validation as well. And that went very well indeed, except when I spoke about the national religion, and all bets were off at that point. And we need to valorize, obviously, both the language, the national language and national religion. And so it was, but I have stepped back consciously, deliberately in recent times because my health does not allow me to do much of these things anymore. But it's been very helpful to be able to talk on a daily basis, and it needs to be done. People do not understand that country. Some of us don't, and the so-called experts who have been there don't know much about it either. And that's perhaps the most painful thing, because they bring in all the Western narratives that we all complain about. And it's constant barrage. And to respond to this is very difficult indeed. I live in a retirement home now, and people have questioned whether they said that I was not Haitian, and actually went out of the way to say that I could not possibly be Haitian because I'm suave and debonair. I speak several languages, this and that, etc. I have a PhD, therefore you cannot be Haitian, and we refuse to accept you as such. And so there are some folks who no longer speak to me here, but that's okay too. But but it's been very good for me to expose myself that way throughout the country, and in other countries as well, as I traveled to Africa, Western Europe, South America, lectured at 5 Brazilian universities throughout Brazil, for instance, realizing they knew very little about Haiti also. But I'm deliberately stepping back now.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Mark, or whoever else, recent experiences with writing for the public, feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we have to be very careful. Like, there are certain times that people are expecting a certain narrative, and you need to, like, if they ask you a question and the question is framed, why is Haiti poor? You have to tell them that's a bad question. And with risking, like Patrick never being invited again, saying this is not the question to be asking. Why was Haiti rendered poor? It would be a better question. Even so, we have to talk about this. So you have to practice redirecting the question. You have to practice, finding new bullet points that are going to stick. But journalists that are like print journalists are looking for 6 words, 8 words, 10 words, whatever, short. So whatever you can think of to make it like, you have to be able to sum things up, and sometimes it's not worth the exercise. Like, Haiti is complex, as all human beings are complex, and the nuance is lost in translation. And so you can push back. But so you have to make a decision: is engaging at all worth doing, or is it is engaging the conversation capitulating to the idea that if I don't do it, someone else will? So it's really it's a double-edged sword. Since the assassination, I made a decision to refer people to Haitians. I always refer to people that are Haitian in Haiti. Oftentimes it has to be in English. So that's a smaller number than individuals that can speak their own native languages of French and Creole. So right there, that's a filter. People that have NGO connections or hookups, that's a filter. That's a smaller subset. So we have to be cautious about how and who we refer to. Who we refer to in terms of like who journalists can talk to, or other sorts of queries. But since the earthquake, which is more directly related to my actual research, I have been doing the same, referring people again to the aid workers, but like they don't have time for journalist interviews. Like they're doing their work, so let them do their work. So I felt a little more of an obligation to actually speak up this time around, and be accountable for taking the mic and being the Blanc who speaks about Haiti, another Blanc who is like opining. So, and I'm open and always have been open for people pushing back at me and raising important critical questions. So, so like for the assassination of Moise, I was taking definitely a backseat. And for this time around, I was trying to take a backseat, and I was being told, love it, thank you for referring NPR to me, but I can't take this call right now, so you have to do it. So, you know, that's a context specific question that we have to engage. Like, what is the most ethical way to do this is to have people write their own stories, you know, but not everyone has access to TikTok, Twitter, or, you know, Facebook. So in the meantime, we have, the best we can do is just have conversations in our WhatsApp, translate the WhatsApp, and, you know, get those out as much as possible, and disrupt the prestige economy that accrues whenever you do speak to a journalist, or a policymaker. And I'm doing what I can behind the scenes, and that's actually a lot more important than I'm doing in public. Like if organizations that take the ideas that I've been working on for 20 years, like, and run with them, that's like better than me being the front person for it. And it's also better that people do the work, and own it. And so, like, that's actually much more long-term sustainably a good response. But media work is always going to be fraught. So that's why you have things like Twitter. And to those who can do a TikTok, great. I mean, I'm even like, every day I'm like, should I go back on Twitter because I have a new phone and I haven't done it because I've been doing this other work. So I should say how uncomfortable or how fraught that is for me as an individual. But that's why you have things like Medium, so people can get their stuff out there. But again, like, you know, whatever we can to actually help empower those who are in Okai, in Pestel, in Abrico, in Port Salut, in Camperin, to actually say what's on their mind. They don't have electricity, so like that's going to be, and that's not the priority right now. So those are some of the deeper ethical questions that I'm grappling with right now.
Yeah, and I think for me, and I've just been chatting away, I've put several resources in the chat. I think given that we are in a world that's so visual, it's important that we see conversation narrative about Haiti through various lenses. I know on this, on the Zoom, I see Jacques Constant, who has the International Film Festival in Hollywood, two images showing a different narratives of Haiti. And I put the work of a number of artists, most of whom I've worked with or I've been in conversation with, and their website. I think those stories are also important, especially visually. At times when I show people the work of Vladimir Civil Charlier in a class, or Ulrich Jean-Pierre, they're like, oh, this is Haiti? Or Colette Brasilia, or Edouard Duval-Carrier, or a number. And there's so many. I'm thinking of Tessa Marx. All these, I think, always we have to think about changing the narratives. And I put a recent op-ed I did with Truth Out, challenging the narrative of Haiti using kind of like my personal narrative as well, because this is very real for me. So I think sometimes when I tell people, this is how I'm living this. Like last week, I was doing a presentation in Wakaima when the earthquake happened, before the earthquake happened rather. And I had to be at this space and I had to be telling people, you know, this is what I'm feeling. And I was texting with one of my cousins from the Central Plateau, from Ange, who said, we feel the house shaking, thinking about 2010. And I wrote about that because I think people need to also see us as intellectual, to the extent that we're comfortable with it, that this is a reality for us as well. And I also posted in the chat a beautiful, beautiful essay by the poet Soni Toneme called A Killing 200 Years in the Making on Haiti and the Narrative of Empire. And I thought it was just so filled with so many things. And he talked about how it took him time, you know, to come with this essay. And what's hard, I think, is when this happened, the major news outlet, they want something right now. They're only interested in the first 5 minutes. and 30 minutes later, they're no longer interested. And this interest, the way we're talking about Haiti, the way we're talking about stories, it has to continue. I think, for instance, of work people, colleagues I see here, I think of Chantal Vernat, the work that she has been doing on changing the narrative on Haiti. I think of Mario Lamotte and Dasha Chapman as performance artists and scholars in the work that they do. And I think of Valérie Loachot, you know, putting together images as well as to talk about Haiti. And I want to be mindful and not keep focusing on the conversation about this, but I want to go to Alexandra because I know she has a PowerPoint, but I also know when Jessica and I, in the last stages of the book, we were trying to get to that finish line, and most of you know what that's like. And we had some, you know, tension, positive tension, in trying to reshape the narrative. So I would like to invite her to talk about that, because this is very much connected to history and being a public intellectual and a teacher. So Alessandra, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Okay. Let me share it quickly. I think I'll start with what Petrushka, you said about the macro and the micro. And so I've never understood myself as a public intellectual in the way that I would speak to the newspapers and all of that. But I do feel and I see that students are the next generation of those who will be interviewing those who they would interview. And that to me is there's more potential for two reasons. One is it's a semester long, so it's not, what did you say, 9 words or 10 words? And they are younger in general, and they have more time to fight with you and disagree with you. So this is, and then I'll talk a little bit about, so that I'll lead into that from that. So let me just share my PowerPoint really quickly. And I'll start from the nitty gritty. Okay. I'm not going to go through everything. I'm going to go through what speaks to it right now. So when we so the article went through many back and forths, and at the very last minute, Jessica and Cecile did close reading. They were really not happy, and I didn't understand why at the beginning, with the words, 2 words that we had used. One was tragic, and we kept using the word pragmatic, and I'll explain it in a second. But before I do that, slideshow from current slide. In another article in the volume by Sophie Watt, Sophie writes, vocabulary and semantics thus paint a picture of wretchedness. Terms like tragic history, corruption, and social misery are reinforced through the use of numerous superlatives. I'll stop there. But just to give an example, it's a great honor for me to be along with Marie-Josée, a book review editor for the Journal of Haitian Studies right now. And just going through, I realized that many of us are constantly doing the same thing, using words like tragic and using the words like pragmatic and poignant. That was one of them. Now, there were 2 of us writing this article, and it really has to do with the idea of translation as well. So one was completely my fault. I thought the word pragmatic was fine, and I'll give you an example. And it took really being called out by Cecile and Jessica to understand why using the word pragmatic was wrong. And second was one that that Darren and I had to agree to disagree on, and it had to do with audience and who he thought the audience of the article was and who I thought it was, and then settling on that. And that was the word settler. I wanted to say that the United States was a settler society, and he refused to use the word because he said, from the get-go, we would discourage certain readings from going forward, because just saying that the US is settler is engaging decolonial studies, which many American study historians would right away say, this is not the type of work I do. It's too, it borderlines on not being academic, is how he understood it. So we thought this article is really for people who are thinking of putting in one segment of their whole semester on Haiti, and we don't want to discourage them, we want to encourage them. So that was one big decision we had to make. And from what Jessica and Cecile brought out, we had to think about our audience, who, because the article had to do with the founding father of the USA and his son, meant that many of these people who might be reading this article would probably be more conservative than not conservative, even if they understand themselves as not conservative. The deep questioning that came up had to do with assuming we be taken seriously so as not to be delegitimized from the onset by certain audience members, and that's the word settler. And the clearest way that we decided to do it, or rather that Jessica said we should do it, and it was really hard. We spent hours, Darren and I, negotiating every single removal of these words, was to take out the words tragic and pragmatic. And in one place we couldn't. And this is what it looked like at the beginning. So one remained unfixed, I realized when I was going through it today. Tragically, this meant that some of the decisions John Adams and John Quincy Adams, made conflicted with their constitutional and Republican principles. And the big problem with this that Jessica made us realize was that tragic for whom? Is it tragic for John Adams and John Quincy Adams, for all the white people in the United States? Or was it tragic? So the question of for whom, right? And the second one was the word pragmatic. In focusing on Haiti and narrating the early history of the United States, it becomes clear that statesmen of the First Republic in the Western Hemisphere struggled between principle and pragmatism. So what that holds is that I, as author, assumed that it was pragmatic to have slavery. And what we changed it to was struggled between principle and what they understood to be pragmatism. And again, thanks to Jessica and Cecile, and then also I had to bring in Laurent Dubois, because that was the only person that Darren Staloff would allow me to bring in to allow us to make these changes. There was a question in the chat by, I think, Catherine, about how does the university come against you, even in the co-authored article that took place, was Haiti chose, oh, sorry, I thought I had a slide on it. Haiti chose that absolutely, one of the non-negotiables was no slavery, and the United States did not. So whether or not John Adams and John Quincy Adams personally were against slavery is not a tragedy. The fact that the entire United States did not choose a non-negotiable the way Haiti did, and that there were these two paths forward, and the world chose the whiteness and the path forward, is what the tragedy is. And so we tried to stay really, 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 really factual in our article. And these little judgment words is what I call them now. I've completely removed them from everything I do, everything I write. And that's all thanks to the editing process with you, Cecile and Jessica. And I think these little, and now I do that in the editing of my students' work. And that's where I think the micro to the macro happens, is we're not going to change somebody who's a well-established journalist in his 30s or 40s or 50s, possibly if they have a life-changing experience, but we can, over the course of a semester, really challenge our students, who then become those people doing the interviews.
Thank you. Jessica, is there anything that you would like to contribute before we move on to the next question?
Well, I was just going to say, Alessandra, thank you for talking about that issue, because and as you were mentioning, it may seem like such a small thing, but it's so huge as a kind of tell of the positionality of the writer. And I feel like as white people, as white academics, it's just like super important. I mean, so I appreciate, and Cecile and I deeply appreciate your kind of going to battle for that stuff, because we know we have a sense of how it was for you to make those changes. It may seem like a small thing, but as you're saying, ultimately it came down to these sort of these whole notions of what is what is history, what is scholarship, et cetera, in a sense.
No, it was also those freebie last conclusion moments that I think I notice in my students' writings, when I do peer reviews. It's those, when we start to use those judgment words, tragic, all the words that everybody today has so far spoken about, and we just should get rid of them. I mean, because they don't change the narrative, and that's the thing too. It's not new narratives. New narratives for whom? And I think that's the last 3 reviews that are going to publication for the next Journal of Haitian Studies. All say it's time now to no longer say these are new narratives. That means we're doing research from the US, we're doing research from France. What if when we're doing research from Haiti, that's not new narratives? They're old narratives that need to be repeated, reminded, all of that.
Thank you. So I'm I have the pleasure of asking the last question so I can make it a little bit more personal. Myself as a first-year scholar and as an artist, I'm always very conscientious about my audience, as we spoke today. And you used a wonderful word, Alessandra, non-negotiable. What are those things in that space that are non-negotiable for ourselves? And we do understand that just in this conversation alone, we did not cover everything that we would like to cover, but we hope to continue this conversation in what it means to teach Haiti in the classroom and outside of the classroom, especially giving our identities and our positionality. And so for myself as an artist, I'm always wondering, what is the contribution? And I hope that everyone who has shared with us today can chime in on this. What is the contribution that you feel or hope that students will provide in establishing what I would call is the organic gap that comes about when we try to shift pre-existing narratives? Because for myself as an artist, not only am I looking as to what I present to the audience, but I'm also looking and I'm very inquisitive as to what comes from the audience back to myself. So as instructors and public intellectual scholars, what is it that you hope and feel that will be given back to this body of work by our future students and future emerging scholars? And I will start with the last person to speak. Jessica, you could be the first to answer this question.
Okay, sure thing. Yeah, I was thinking about that kind of issue actually last night as I was preparing for this conversation. And I'm teaching a class on crime this semester, and I've taught it a couple times. And as part of that class, I wanted to talk about crimes in the sense of genocide, like historical events that students may not have been aware of, and kind of this sort of take a larger view of that issue. So I assigned some work on the Parsley Massacre to my students here at the University of Puerto Rico. And I asked them, did you know about this event? And they said no. And they said, why don't we know about this already? We are in part of the Hispanophone Caribbean. And I showed a video that was actually in Spanish from the point of view of Dominican lawyers and government officials. And there were interviews of people that were living on the border now, because since 2010, right, the Dominican Republic amended their constitution to essentially make many people who had previously been Dominicans, who were the children of 2 Haitian parents, stateless. And so there was a real continuity there, I think, for the students, in terms of, we're in Puerto Rico. This is a country that shares a language with us, And yet we have never heard of any of these events and this kind of historical kind of, you know, really things being all of a piece in terms of the violence against people, Haitians and people of Haitian descent. And I felt like that was a really productive moment and something that I wanted to do more with, because I think there was a sense among the students, and I've done this for, this is going to be my third semester of doing this work, that they wanted to know more. And I think as a teacher, that's what I can do. I can make people want to go and learn more by opening these doors and saying, you know, this is like, this is happening, right? This is real. And it's not separate, right? It's not separate from us. So I think that that sense of connection, I guess, is something that I hope to, I hope to kind of invite, right? I hope to kind of evoke or create a place where students can learn stuff that gives them a sense of their place in the world and their connectedness to others. I guess that's really where I'm at with it.
Thank you. Alessandra?
For me, because of my, so I'm situated in sort of two public spheres right now, one very much in the Netherlands and one in the US, where you came to my class, Petrushka, and I see my positionality in both of them completely different. But there's one big thing overarching, which is mentorship. And it comes from somebody who had just read Isabel Allende for the first time, because he was the first person who ever asked me, I'm going to Haiti because I'm part of some big project that the university asked me to be part of, and I want to read 5 novels. What would you, I already got Isabel Allende, can you give me some? No one has ever asked me that. And sometimes I even offer it and they say, no, thank you. And he then became obsessed with Isabel Allende, and he said, as an academic, I spent so much time in my ego worrying about who above the pyramid I was trying to please. And and Isabel Allende says, when you're 50, you should start looking down at all the people who are looking up at you. So A, for your ego, you don't like a fool, and B, because that is what it is to you've done your work, in fact, by then, and now you're mentoring. And so I see my work as always mentoring now, and based on the public sphere I'm in, it's different. And actually, for personal reasons, I left academia, but I also was and it was very helpful to me because I was very vexed about my positionality in the academy, especially doing literary studies. So for me, I only do things when I'm asked to do them, and I try to spend most of my time. I accept every peer review. I accept every letter of recommendation, because I see my job today is to mentor as many people into the academy who represent better what I am studying, because I can't get away from I study Haiti. I just can't get away from it, and it's a lot better if it's an equal on both sides of that verb. On the other hand, in Europe, I really understand what Raoul Peck said when in the last film he made, neutrality is not an option. And so in Europe, where there really is no understanding, and luckily there's a new book explaining why Haiti was so important, not just to France, but also to every single republic's consideration of its constitution after 1804. My work, I see it as really patiently, starting from the beginning and bringing Haiti into the historical picture. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And Monsieur Patrick, m'a demandé au courage pour bonne sagesse. How would you, because I heard you, I was like, I'm taking a step back. You young ones, you come forward. So give us, in your experience.
It's on my campus. My department is African American and African Diaspora Studies. And I was the only person doing Caribbean studies, and of course, with heavy infusion of Haiti. And also, I was doing courses on Africa, which very few other professors were doing on my campus. And I found similar problems in terms of narratives, prevailing narratives in my classes with reference to Africa, with reference to the rest of the Caribbean as well as Haiti. Of course, Haiti had the bad press, as people know, but this also was found in other parts of the African diaspora. My students were overwhelmingly white. Very few Black students came to our courses because they had to take multicultural courses, and they chose some of ours. And so the same narrative prevailed in those parts of the world as well. But keep in mind, I retired 15 years ago, so I'm not completely cognizant of what you guys are facing today in the classroom. I suspect that it's very similar to what I experienced over 45 years of teaching. And so I will leave it at that.
Thank you. And Cecile, I will let you respond as our closing as we move on to Q&A.
Thank you, Petrushka. I had the advantage of listening to others. So I think for me, it's about when I'm in the classroom, I try to be my authentic self, and it can go two ways. I have students who loves me and I have students who can't stand me. And I try to do that early on so that they can have the choice to leave the classroom. I have on occasion brought to students my own work that has been corrected by colleagues. I try to remain humble. So one of the basis of my teaching philosophy is that teaching is learning. So I model that in telling them while I'm teaching them, I want to learn from them and I'm learning from others. And even within this book, I am so grateful for scholars who read the book, including Claudine Michel, who gave feedback. And there has to be that certain level of humility, and that because if your ego is so much in the center, you're not going to have that space to learn and make something strong. And because my training as someone who was taught to teach language, we have the 5 C's in language teaching: communication, culture, connection, comparison, and communities. I believe in teaching about Haiti, one of the ways to make sure we are creating new narratives is to adopt like 4 C's: collaboration, connection, cooperation, and creation. And I think we have to leave space for our students to be able to create. We're giving them the knowledge. And when we're collaborating, again, radically getting out of our comfort zone, getting out of literature and say, you know what? I want the historian to come so we can have great conversation. Even though I have my own prejudice, I have issues with historians because some of them think they hold the truth with a capital T, present company excluded, but I have to create that space. And when we create those spaces, we can have something so meaningful. We can have something extraordinary.
Thank you so much. And I thank the panelists for being here today. And now I will turn this over to my fellow colleague, Mario, who will handle the Q&A section of this presentation.
Thank you for a very rigorous discussion, and thank you to the panelists for their work. I encourage you all to enter your questions in the chat, and I will field them. We'll begin with a question that was posed earlier by Catherine Podogil, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. And you have touched upon the panelists upon this question before, but now maybe this is an opportunity for you to clarify and deepen your ideas. So Catherine Podogil asked, if I understand correctly, you all are college teachers. Can you teach Haiti without repercussions from the university? Also, what about high school students? What resources can they or their teachers count on?
Perhaps I'll
Should I
start.
should I pop? Okay. And
Oh.
your popcorn, Cecile, maybe?
Yeah. So I mean, I'll start. I think for me, because there are so many wonderful resources in the book, including syllabus, including readings, including really museum sites, I think there are opportunities for high school teachers to first educate themselves and create a unit. I know, for instance, when I was at the University of Kansas and we did a whole conference on the unexpected Caribbean, and Haiti was a big part of it because we had an exhibit, we have a collection of Haitian art. We actually had workshop for K-12 instructors, and there are a lot of resources. So Catherine, if you want to be in communication with me, I can actually send you information. I can put you in contact, including, for instance, like there's a map of Haiti, and not of just Haiti, but a map of the US. And it's, if you Google Ulrich Jean-Pierre and look through his website, and I'll see after I'm done talking if I can put it there, showing how the US double in size. And to me, that's just such an important tool because it's something very tangible. You don't have to do a lot of work. You don't need to have a lot of knowledge about Haiti, but just visually and showing, for instance, how you can, and this is where art is so important in films, visual images. You can show the work of artists. You can also show, for instance, famous Haitian people. I'm thinking of Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable, the founder of Chicago. I'm thinking of Audubon in New Orleans. So these are a lot of the ways that can easily be done without having a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Cecile, based on just kind of like what you were mentioning about the syllabi in the book, I was looking over the book again yesterday and just was feeling really struck by how much everybody had put into each chapter regarding, you know, practical teaching materials. And I think those are eminently translatable from, you know, a university level to a high school level. I hope that, you know, and I just want to kind of flag, you know, clearly that all that stuff is there and it's so rich, and every single chapter has really useful and detailed and practical information about teaching. And that's one of the beauties of this book, is that it contains that type of material, and it's super unique in that way. So I want to encourage anybody who's interested in looking at that material to take it, steal it, you know, like it's for you.
All right. Again, I do encourage you to post your question in the chat. And I also, all of the colleagues, all of the participants have posted many resources that would be really important as we discuss resources for Teaching Haiti. So they're all in the chat, and there are words of praise and amazing commentaries to the panelists' words. The next question is from Michel Degraff. And the question is, thinking about the title of this panel, Translating Haiti, and thinking about the limitations of translation, what role must we all assign to Creole as a key tool in teaching and learning about Haiti? sitting here, I'm thinking about panels about, say, French studies, where most contributors would be fluent in French and most happy to converse in French. But Haiti seems to be exceptional in that respect, where so much of Haitian studies goes through translation with little room given to original voices in Creole. What do you suggest we work on filling this gap? Dr. Patrick, do you want to begin? I'm popcorning to you first. What do you think?
This is an important question that I keep struggling with. And in fact, I thought that most of us would be addressing this audience in Creole today, and I was wrong in that assumption. It seems to me that small countries of the global South have particular difficulties unless they speak a European language in terms of addressing those concerns. And these are real concerns, especially those of us who do work in Haiti. This is something that we face constantly. Folks, in that sense, as an illustration, in 2004, the Journal of Haitian Studies asked me to ask various scholars who do work in Haiti to give their list of most important works in Haitian studies from the 19th century and the 20th century. And many young scholars who do Haiti could not mention a single work in the 19th century. And some of those scholars did not know French enough because those books have not been translated into English. So they could not read those to start with. But it seems to me, to a large extent, that the discovery of Haiti is when they actually land in Port-au-Prince, and so there is nothing before their landing in Port-au-Prince. And so they come fresh into Haiti, and history, as far as I'm concerned, starts with them at that moment. We need to do a better job of this. Several American universities teach Haitian Creole now, and we need to pursue that with a vengeance, as far as I'm concerned, because we are, in fact, disconnected. French has lost a great deal of ground in Haiti. When I was a child in Port-au-Prince, you heard French in the streets, no longer now. You heard chansonnette française in the streets, no longer now. And so we need to face reality that French, in one sense, is a dying language in Haiti and in other places. So we need to get on with it.
Would anyone like to? Mark, go ahead.
Yon ti bagay pou ajouter, c'est le ou fait pour devoir pour étudier en ethnologie, faculté d'ethnologie pour faire ma fait pour, et me fait devoir yo pi à l'aise en français, c'est peut-être ça même dit, si vous besoin de lire un bagay pour écrire. Donc c'est une façon pour valoriser un petit crasse. C'est pas tout à fait bon. Capable d'une solution à long terme. L'autre bagage, c'est écrit direct en créole. Les plus facile, depuis vous faites un bagage direct dans la langue, ça, au lieu de faire traduction, et puis écrit anglais et puis traduire. Donc, écrit direct, si vous êtes capable de parler créole ou capable d'écrire créole tout. Donc, c'est un petit bagage, mais c'est une bonne question. C'est un lutte en cours.
Any other takers before I go to the next question? Go ahead, Alessandra.
No, I mean, I could say, yeah, I'll be honest. I actually feel completely incompetent because I came to it through Francophone studies in French and then studied Creole for a few years, but never became fluent the way I would like to be fluent. So I understand, but I don't, and I understand this type of Creole. I don't understand when people are speaking in a big group amongst each other. And I think that's unacceptable. And I think that to do Haitian studies, one needs to speak what Patrick is saying is one need, and I think in the review that Carlos Elius is going to have in the next issue. He says people need to be able to speak French because so much of the scholarship from Haitian scholars for so long was in French. And then you also have important Haitian scholars doing work in Quebec. And then people need to speak Haitian Creole. And that's the piece where I don't speak it well enough to write in it. And that it's just not acceptable, which also makes me feel that that's why I need to I'm only here to be able to help people to do what's needed from my past 20 years. But I don't think anyone going through the future. Then there's another way of looking at it, which is Haiti is the Americas. So then if you speak Spanish, if you speak Portuguese, if you speak any Creole from the Americas, you have the right to study Haiti. So I think it's the relation that Cecile was talking about, but being really clear about where your grounding is and where you're coming into the relation and who your audience is with that relation in mind. Or I'm maybe posing this more as a question than as a statement.
I was just gonna, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's the Zoom thing. Sorry. Mario, I'm sorry. I was just gonna mention that when we were, I was speaking with Cecile and Valerie about the book and you know, Cecile mentioned that I was kind of part of the editing process, and there was, you know, such a sense. Cecile was like, we have got to have an essay on language in this volume. It is, you know, it's not possible to go to press without an essay on language. So we do have an essay in the volume on Creole by Don Wallachek, who's a linguist here at the University of Puerto Rico. So just to kind of acknowledge that is part of this particular volume, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Yeah, and if I may briefly add, I think we are having this conversation. Last week, Carrie Cohn had In the Name of Bookman, and one of the things that came out, and in fact, it's one of the many things I forgot to mention, they want to give grants to people who are doing translation because they want to be able to translate text from Haitian Creole into English so that other Francophone, Anglophone islands can have access. So I think they're starting to have conversation about the importance of these dialogue, these relations. And as some of you know, Regine Jackson, Jean-Eddy St. Paul, and myself, we were on a panel last year at the Caribbean Studies Association, and we talking about language and decolonizing Haitian studies and etc. And one of the things that we discussed was the fact that Caribbean studies, they're going to have a journal, and Haitian Creole is not one of the languages. And I have one of my students who have written to them about that, and they claim they were looking for people, and a lot of us are very disturbed by that because they didn't reach out to HSA. So all that is to say, I think there's conversation about that, and we need to, but it's an important topic.
All right. I think in the interest of time, I'll move along. I know that we will reserve at least a good 5 minutes or more for Regine Jackson to give us some announcements about the conference and other matters, or Regine and Mark Schuler. There's a question from Jacqueline Constant, and I think it might be geared more toward you, Cecile, since you're the visual arts and film expert of the group, of the panelists. Jacqueline Constant asks, why is it important to create a Haitian cinema ecosystem through education, business, and non-profit organization? And before you answer that, Cecile, I'm going to scroll to the next question in the interest of time. And the next two questions maybe. How do panelists see conventional representations of Haiti in the universe of colonial representations of other places? Is Haiti's representation fundamentally different from all others, or different by a matter of degree or something else? And I'll repeat that if you need a reminder. And the last question, I'm trying to bundle them. From Irene Irene Bisson. I'd love to hear panelists' reflections on the question of teaching about Haiti or with Haitian cases in subject courses that are not specifically about Haiti, particularly the challenge of providing adequate historical context without indulging in an expectation that Haiti is unknowable and encountering students' resistance to the relevance of Haitian cases. I think it begins with Cecile's comment on teaching in Haiti in relation, but would love to hear more thoughts in this line. So I can come back to the other questions, but Cecile, do you want to begin?
I'll be brief. I think Patrick mentioned something earlier when he was talking, the importance for Haitians living in the US as well, the new generation diasporic Haitians, that they don't know anything about Haiti, or they know very superficial information. And I think this is where films come in. Because we're in a generation, everything is visual. For me, I am passionate about popular Haitian films, because for me, they say so much about what is really happening. And also there are so many people who are watching them, these films on YouTube. So I definitely think the work that filmmakers such as yourself, Jackie Constant, you are doing, this is what the average Haitian person, many of them, we're talking about non-academic, they're watching these films. And so they are important. And this is back to artists, because visually it's so important. And this is why I think going to K-12, and this is where we can have these complex conversations and change the narratives. Thank you.
Would any one of you panelists like to tackle James Gertz's question? How do panelists see conventional representations of Haiti in the universe of colonial representations of other places? Or Ian Wisson's question, to hear about teaching about Haiti or with Haitian cases in subject courses that are not specifically about Haiti. Alessandra, go ahead.
So being in Europe right now, this, I think, something I've been struggling with, and a lot of people who, well, the few people who are working on the Caribbean and in the Netherlands, is what happens when, so this is the whole thing about the syllabus and making sure that on your syllabus you're decolonizing it. But then I think a volume like Teaching Haiti is so incredibly important, because there's one about seeing oneself as a pedagogue as responsible, and then what Cecile said, where teaching is learning. And that second step is a really big one, because the minute one puts Haiti on their syllabus, how one teaches that is crucial, right? So I think that's why this whole conversation is so important. It's not just to put Haiti on the syllabus, it's not even just to put Haitian scholars on the syllabus, but are you capable of teaching it in a responsible way? And I think that is what is so difficult, even for me, as I just spoke. You're never capable, you're never completely capable. So how do you create relations in teaching? And I think that comes from those of us who are at the higher levels and have the capacity to say we should be team teaching or quadruple teaching, or what we did at the Center for Worker Education when I was there was we did these book lecture courses, and you had one teacher who facilitated, and then there was money to bring in, and it wasn't even much, it was like 75 euros per person to bring in speakers for weeks 2 through 9. And that way an expert is teaching it, and then somebody else is facilitating and doing all the grading and all of that. So my answer to that is more that there's 2 steps to the translation. 1, there's doing the act of making it present, and 2, how to actually carry it out. And then if you don't have the capacity, a volume like Teaching in Haiti is essential.
Thank you. Patrick, do you have any thoughts on this on the second question? Since you've taught in the department, you've had to teach surely like in sort of an African diaspora studies course or Caribbean studies course. How do you place Haiti in dialogue with that web with sort of the Americas and Africa?
Well, the very last public lecture I did was in February of right before the pandemic, and I talked about Haiti as Wakanda. Certainly, the African American intelligentsia was very much concerned and interested in Haiti in the 19th century, into the first part of the 20th century, in terms of the Harlem Renaissance and whatnot. And there was real interest in terms of African American newspapers and publications on Haiti, certainly. And certainly African Americans came to the rescue of Haiti to the extent that they could during the US occupation of that country. Well, since then, there was a resurgence of interest in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement in terms of African American interest in both Africa and the Caribbean, certainly. And you have to remember that many of the major civil rights leaders, all of them pretty much had Caribbean antecedents, pretty much all of them, all the way to the present. And this is something that we usually are not familiar with. But these days, media overwhelms. There is less interest in terms of Africa and the African diaspora in the US, for instance. And the media representations become absolutely critical. People are less interested, they don't see it as valid to their own experience, and this is a mistake. And so I wish we had the enthusiasm that we found in the 19th century, or perhaps even during the civil rights movement, to looking at other African-derived society. Now, the interest that I find in this country is in the resurgence of African-derived religions throughout the United States. And these are some of those most powerful. It's interesting that the religions that are growing the most in the US are African-derived religion these days. And it's all over the place. It overwhelms to the extent that people are saying that perhaps African religions will survive because of the presence in the United States and in Western Europe, rather than in Africa proper or in Haiti for that matter. But I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Okay, sure. Go ahead, Cecile.
As I was listening to Patrick, one of my all-time favorite piece of Patrick that I use in all my classes and recommend to so many people is his NPR on Bing that I'm going to put on the chat, because there are so many topics one can be teaching. Just listening to him is just incredible. But also one of the things, and many Haitian scholars, including Marlene Doe, Jean-Eddy St. Paul has said, and I think part of what Patrick is saying is that before hashtag, Haiti was saying Black Lives Matter. And so that's what we sometimes forget. We don't have to be teaching a course about Haiti for Haiti to have a place in that course, whether we're talking about dance, whether history, whether global, whether intro to American studies, intro to Latin American studies, etc. So wonderful NPR on Being, listen to it. Oh my God, it's awesome.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the panelists. I'm sure Regine Jackson and Mark Schuler will have more closing words, but Regine, the virtual room is yours. If you have any announcements, we have about 3 minutes or so.
Yes.
Yes, so it's yours.
Thank you so much, Mario. Thank you to everyone who participated in this panel today. It's so good to see you in this space with everything going on. whether, with everything going on, it is just such an honor, and it's so rejuvenating to have these spaces and these important conversations. When Cecile gave me a copy of the book, I kept it by my bed so that I can read it in snatches, and I've been devouring it. It is such an incredible resource. I encourage you all to invest in it, get your libraries to invest in it. And HSA, as you can see, we've been busy. We've got a couple of upcoming deadlines. We've got deadlines for applications for the Emerging Scholars Award, for the Michel Wolf Trio Fund. We've got another event of our monthly events in September. We've got this Haitians Book Club event on Friday, September 10th. September 1st is the deadline for the early registration for the conference. Please know that the program committee has been really working to put together a dynamic program, and we're hearing from members. We're soliciting information from members to find out how you want to convene in October. We have a survey going out soon to all participants, people who submitted papers and panels and roundtables, so that we can find out how can we do this important work in a way that allows the most participation. So please keep an eye out in your email for that survey. It's very, very short, but we want to continue to make room for these kinds of conversations and for the important work that all of you are doing. So I just wanted to say thank you. I apologize for missing the first hour. I can't wait for this call to end so I can hear it and go back and get all of those nuggets of such good information and important conversation that I heard today. So thank you so much for coming.
Mark, Darlene, Petrushka, any last words? You have basically a minute. And Ayana and all the folks on the committee.
Thank you so much for everyone to being here. We as Emerging Scholars are very excited about what we have lined up for this year. We know that we have a lot of decisions to make, but I do appreciate being part of HSA and the opportunity of making Haiti a primary conversation instead of a footnote. So again, courage tout le monde.
And since you mentioned my name, you're probably waiting for me to say thank you all. So thank you all. Thank you, Cecile. Can't wait to read it. And do take a look at that survey. It's going to be coming out the next day or so. We do need to make a very hard decision in front of us, and we need your responses, because this is going to be a very difficult decision for all of us. So yeah, that's on the live YouTube stream. So let's end on a more positive note. Thank you all for continuing to be engaged, and we look forward to seeing you in whatever format in our conference in October. Kembe Fem Tutmun.
Thank you. Merci. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Bye, y'all.